Hey, welcome to another day of Walking with Jesus, and a good morning to you, or good afternoon, or good evening, whichever time it is for you. As we continue to walk with Jesus through the Gospel of Luke, we are in Luke chapter 7, verse 11. 7:11. I think I feel like a coffee. Anyway, we are going to be walking with Jesus. It is shortly after he has healed the servant of the centurion. And so let's get into this beginning at Luke chapter 7, verse 11. Soon afterward, he went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came up and touched the bier, and the bearers stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak. And Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him spread through the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country. So as we walk with Jesus today, we encounter the miraculous. We encounter a moment when the general order of things is superseded, and when the King of Kings steps in and delivers a dead man back to his mother. Now, there are several shocking things in here, aside from the healing itself. And we need to kind of get in touch with the culture of the time. So, first of all, Jesus is walking. He sees this funeral procession coming out of the city, and it says he has compassion on her. I don't think that it would be unusual for anyone necessarily to have compassion on people in a funeral procession. Jesus certainly was not unusual at that moment. But then to tell the woman, the mother, who is bereft of evidently her only son and her husband, "Do not weep," that is a little bit shocking. What do you mean, don't weep? I have no support. I have no income. I have no means of provision and care for my future. I am left utterly alone and abandoned in this world with no means of support and sustenance. Not to mention, this is my son and he's dead. That probably came as something of a shock to her that he would say that. The next thing, though, it would perhaps be even more shocking. He came up and touched the bier. That means he touched the platform on which the dead man was laying. Now, to do that would immediately render him unclean. It was just not something that you did. Those who had been asked to carry the bier were close friends, and they would go through the period of ritual purification before being able to worship again. But for a stranger to walk up and touch the funeral bier, the place of death, that would be shocking indeed to the people there. And no wonder the bearers stood still. They're like, okay, this is weird. And so he stops and he says, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak. I'm assuming that they tell you he began to speak so that you know he was alive. And Jesus gave him to his mother, and fear obviously seized them all. Well, as we walk with Jesus, what do we take away from this? I'm not going to exhort you to go interrupt any funeral processions. I don't think it's wise for us to just enter into a circle of mourning and grief, telling people don't cry. And I am certainly not telling you to go and lay your hands on a dead person and tell them to rise up. I don't know that we have the authority to do that. We have authority, but unless the Holy Spirit of God truly convicts you that this is something He wants you to do, don't attempt it, because you cannot coerce the authority of God. You have to work with it, not against it. So what do we take away from this? Well, as we walk through our world, we may be called to have compassion on others. We may be called to be concerned about others and to enter into places of pain and sorrow. And we may be even called to do something that those around us might think, that's not a good idea. That's not something we should do. You see, Jesus did not allow the peer pressure to change His decision about how to react in this situation. He had compassion on the woman. He was willing to go up and touch the funeral bier, which would render him ritually unclean in the eyes of all who were there, and then to speak life in the midst of a broken and dead situation. I don't know what God is going to lead you into today, but as you walk through this day, would you look around you and be mindful? Where does compassion need to be given? And where can you interact your world in a way that will bring hope and healing? That's what Jesus did. He was on His way. People were following Him, but He had His eyes open to see and to be available to minister to a need when someone needed compassion and when they needed deliverance from a broken situation. Keep your eyes open today. As you walk with Jesus and as He walks living through you, may you see with His eyes of compassion, and may you be willing to enter into whatever situation He leads you to without fear of what others may think. So God bless you as you walk with Jesus today, being compassionate and entering in where He leads you.